have eaten now, I hope, and please don't fall asleep. But I have some very interesting people here. I'm sure you'll be wide awake. We listened to state actors in the previous sessions, but non-state actors play also a very important role in Africa. We have two types of non-state actors. Some are really very bad. We have ISIS, we have Al-Shabaab, we have Boko Haram, we have Wagner Group. All those guys are non-state actors, and I don't dare bring them here to talk to them. I'll be dead. But then we have some decent non-state actors. What we have here on the stage are the leaders of the biggest foundations in the world. These are the leaders of some really influential and quite interesting foundations. Interestingly, all of them have Africa as one of their main focus. I don't know why, but I suspect, if you look at them, you will not suspect that. But all those guys are Africans, believe it or not. Then Sudanese. You obviously you are the only guy who look really an African guy. Those guys don't look Africans at all.
Only you can say that.
And my sister, Gail, is honorary Sudanese. She spent 10 years of her life in Durman, and she cooks Sudanese food at her home. She is one of us. Malik Brown is, of course, the president. Sorry about the Alex couldn't come, but we have the president instead, which I think more interesting. And he's really half African, 50% African. Mark Sussman is 100% African. This is the famous Sussman family, the guys who fought against apartheid, and we really welcome the Sussman memory. So it is very interesting. We have the top foundations in the world, and it's really an African foundation. So relax, I'm not going to give you a hard time. Okay, you are fellow Africans. We really need to listen a little bit about what are you doing. Collectively, you are addressing various areas in Africa: education, health, agriculture, human rights, power, democracy. And that's a very interesting spectrum. I would love to hear from each of you, within 2 minutes, please. What are you doing exactly in Africa? Tell me what exactly are you, because some people don't know really what you're doing. 2 minutes, tell me exactly what you're doing in Africa. You start.
Okay.
Zen.
First time I've been put in the same category as ISIS and Wagner, but I'll forgive you for that.
I said the good guys. I mean, what are you complaining about?
Perhaps we can agree on we're just an actor. Forget whether it's state or not.
No, not state actor is very important to differentiate from a state.
Okay, quickly, what we do as the foundation, I mean, MasterCard Foundation is one of the largest private foundations in the world. It's got about a $35 billion asset base. But it's quite unique in that it's not just prioritizing Africa, it's entirely focused on Africa. And the reason we're focused on Africa, to answer your question, is for all the reasons we've been hearing about last night and today. You know, if the world is going to solve for existential threats that it's facing, Africa has to be part of the solution. You know, we've heard about the arable land, we've heard about the mineral resources, clean energy, and of course, the skilled workforce, the talent for the future. So what the MasterCard Foundation was set up to do was to lift people out of poverty through education and financial inclusion. And on our journey across the last 17 years, we've stayed true to that, but we've pivoted to being more outcome-based. And we've reframed the whole thing as our Young Africa Works strategy, where we have a single-minded goal of putting 30 million young African men and women in fulfilling and dignified work by the year 2030. And of course, that requires education, it requires financial inclusion, but it also requires an incredibly intentional linkage to things like agriculture, technology, clean energy, to the outcomes, to the industrial sectors, to the commercial sectors that we're looking to place these young people in. We have a focus on women. We're looking for at least 2/3 of that number to be women, and to be inclusive of displaced people and people who are unfairly treated as a result of disabilities. The other thing I'd say about our journey is one of the things we've absolutely become crystal clear to us, and again, it's been a theme that's come up time and time again, is this has to be Africa for Africa. There's no external solution on this topic. And to that end, we've intentionally focused all of our efforts against African partnerships. So we now have a goal of making sure that 75% of our partners are African institutions. A great example of that is our partnership with the Africa CDC, where to address COVID, we ran this enormous program with them to onshore vaccine production to Africa, raise healthcare, and solve for Africa. The second, I would say, really big outcome of that is that we've moved the entire organization. Now the majority of our organization is actually based here on the continent. Our whole leadership team live and work in Africa. Because unless you're experiencing the challenges firsthand, unless you're integrated into society, there is no way you can profess to have empathy to the solution. And I'll just close with the way we do it is with a very clear value system. Our values are very clearly framed around humility, and that leads to listening. We start every conversation on Africa with listening. Co-creation is a driving principle for us. We don't come with solutions. We sit down, we listen, and we co-create solutions. Kindness and respect, because if you want to go fast, you're going to make mistakes. You have to assume positive intent. This is back to the narrative of Africa. Africa isn't the only place where things go wrong, Yet somehow it really sticks on us in Africa. So kindness and respect and learning and moving forward is an incredibly important value. And then the final value is impact. And I'll close with that one, because what we all really need is an incredible sense of urgency. We bandy around the numbers and the data for the year 2040, but the issue is today. 2040 is just somewhere out there. What the youth of Africa are looking for us to do is to solve for today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What? Yeah, okay, please.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I bring apologies from Raj Shah. I'm clearly not Raj, and I'm representing him here.
We prefer to have an African over an Indian. We're also racist sometimes, yeah.
I think that I'm representing somebody who is a very eloquent and knowledgeable speaker, and I certainly cannot be him, but I think, as you say correctly, one thing that I can do that Raj can't is to speak as an African.
Yeah.
And I hope to be able to speak very frankly today, because I think you've created something really important here to have frank discussions. So I look forward to having a frank discussion. But really, just in 2 minutes, I think the Rockefeller Foundation is celebrating 110 years this year. So it is one of the oldest foundations, if not the oldest private foundation around. And our mission is uplifting the well-being of humanity all over the world. That mission has not changed in 120 years. It's as relevant today as it was in 1913 when John D. Rockefeller made the endowment that created it. Because of that length of time, I think a lot of what people know about Rockefeller is legacy, and a lot of the things that we have done, even though they've been global, have greatly benefited Africa. And so, the Rockefeller Foundation was involved in the elimination of diseases like malaria, yellow fever, in the United States, and those have benefited Africa. The precursor of the World Health Organization was started by John D. Rockefeller after the Spanish flu. It was called the World Health Institute, 13 countries coordinating their public health activities. That when the World Health Organization was created, those 13 countries became the first member states of the WHO, and the Secretary General of WHI became the first Secretary General of WHO. More recently, there have been institutions like Gavi, like AGRA, whom many people will recognize in this room, which have been seeded or brought together at convening started by the Rockefeller Foundation. So there is a long history and legacy there. Today, the focus is on 4 basic activities within the mission that I mentioned. The first is, and one thing that we've always been involved in, is health. So big focus on health. Today, we are talking about how we can look through the lens of climate change and health, and how that we can support countries to deal with the incoming disease burden that we know is coming with climate change. I think in Africa, we've heard many speakers speak passionately about the effects of climate change, but the climate crisis in Africa is very largely a health crisis. And so that's going to really be an important factor. The second is food, which again has been a mainstay. The Green Revolution in Asia and subsequently in Africa has been a core focus, and that continues. Today, we are focused on what we call nutritious food, based on the fact that largely many parts of the world are going down the route of eating unhealthy foods, and Africa is not to be left behind. I mean, even in rural areas today, you're beginning to see the increase of non-communicable diseases and social sort of diseases like diabetes and high blood pressure. And largely this is because of the foods that we're eating. So we're trying to increase the value chains that produce good food, whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and using public procurement to do that. African countries use nearly $2 billion a year procuring food for schools, for hospitals, and for other institutions. If we use that power of procurement to procure good food, it will impact the value chains across to the producers, and we believe that good food will be more available for everybody. The third area is clean energy and power connections. Again, it's been talked about here how many people in Africa are not connected to power. 600 million is mentioned. I personally think there are more. And how do you do that in the current climate where fossil fuels and we're moving away, we're trying to get to net zero, and so using clean energy to do that. And then the fourth area, which is my personal favorite and I spend a lot of time on, is what body of work we call the global economic recovery. The global economic recovery came out of a vision of Raj just in the middle of the pandemic, when we realized that we were never going to go back to the pre-pandemic days. The countries that even the little capital that they had been wiped out. Others were struggling to deal with the pandemic, the socio-economic effects of it, and it was not going to be possible to go back. And so we came up with a number of initiatives at that time. Raj and a few others, some I believe sitting on this panel, got together and started talking to the IMF about an allocation at that time of SDRs, and then subsequently reallocation of those SDRs by a number of countries to countries that were largely affected. That has morphed into a bigger body of work around the global economic recovery, global financial architecture reform, and the Bridgetown Initiative, which again was something that was being pushed by Prime Minister Mia Mottley, but Raj and others, again on this panel, have been working together in the scenes to create these principles around global financial architecture reform, which I think have now morphed into a global discussion, which is really good to see, because I remember when it was in a small room in Bridgetown being discussed, and now today everybody's talking about Bridgetown, which is I think fantastic, and we need more actors to come. Thank you, Mo.
Thank you. William, I think you've done much better than what Raj would have done here. Thank you very much.
Please don't tell him that.
No, we should tell him that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Gail is the leader of one organization. I think people probably heard about one which is campaigning for cancellation of debt some years ago and managed to play a key role in doing that. Activists and troublemakers.
Yeah, good trouble.
So what trouble are you doing in Africa now?
Yeah.
Tell us.
So we're not really a foundation. If you're looking for grants, look in these directions. And a non-state actor, I will confess it's the first time I've ever been called a non-state actor, but I'll take it. Look, our currency is citizens' voices. I've had the honor of public service 3 times. I've served 3 American presidents. And what I learned there is that big, important decisions aren't made unless there is a combination of pressure from citizens or the creation of political space from citizens. There are a lot of smart people. They have a lot of good ideas, but it's not ever as easy as that. You've got to get through parliaments. You've got to secure budgets. You've got to campaign for the next election, which every politician is always doing. So what we aim to do is think of a big political campaign that's for issues, not for somebody who's running for office. That is for ending the AIDS epidemic, or for building the capacity of Africa to produce for its health and medical needs. Or, as we are doing now, is for a change in the international financial architecture that means not just that it yields more capital for the kinds of things we've heard about here, but so that it's fundamentally fair. So how do we do that? We organize people in North America, Europe, and in Africa. We train what they're called in Africa as one champions, largely young people, although I increasingly find that I'm calling everyone young, in how to campaign and organize, that you actually can go and meet with a senator, whether it's in Abuja or it's in Washington, that you can organize your community, that there are ways to send messages of what you expect, that you can, something we've always done, is use culture and pop culture to capture the public imagination. Be a little cheeky, don't ever be rude, but use some element of surprise, and it really works. So what are we focused on in Africa was your question. I'll tell you one example within Africa, because part of what we believe is that we've got to get the change that's needed, a lot of the change that's been talked about here, including on this last panel, in powerful cities like Washington, London, and Brussels. But we want to see the same change here, as you've talked about, Don talked about, and others talked about. So in Nigeria, what did that mean? A series of campaigns. 1, urging the government to spend more on primary health care. 2, making sure that those resources went out to the states, to the primary health care facilities. And 3, tracking the resources to make sure they went where they were supposed to go. And then publishing that report. Now, the impact of that is really powerful. You get accountability. You get, and one has done this, I mean, one used to do this to the US government when I was in the White House, and it's a really powerful tool when you go with the data and the facts and the transparency and say, William, you said you'd do this and you haven't done it. You get one of 2 reactions. Either they get really angry at you, or the more enlightened ones say, tell me how I can improve my numbers. So it's that kind of campaigning here. But the other thing we strive to do, and there couldn't be a more important moment for it, and this forum is proving it in every single conversation. I think there's been a sea change in terms of what this continent is saying to the rest of the world, largely because it's all coming together. Someone said to me earlier, in the last panel, you know, there was a debate about, is Africa going to choose the United States, the West, the EU, China, Russia, and someone said Africa's choosing Africa. And that kind of message and the kind of frank discussions here, the aspirations here, the potential here is something that we aim to amplify so that we can seek more resources, better policies, and better outcomes for people. So as I say, our currency is organized citizens. I would hope that anybody here who wants to organize, do it and do it quickly. If we want to return Sudan to you and you, Abdullah, and Zainab, anything like that, we've got to organize, because even though it's sometimes hard to believe, I promise you that even the most powerful politicians in the world when they feel the pressure, when they know there is a price to pay if they don't act, but something to win if they do, we can get them to change. So that's what we're about, and we're honored as could possibly be to be doing it with many of you.
I think maybe you did not mention your campaign also to raise funds for the Global Fund.
Yep.
And that also is, I think, useful work, the RED campaign.
It's something we do every, the Global Fund, you mentioned Gavi, there are these, every 3 years, big campaigns to raise funds to do good things like end the AIDS epidemic or get immunization rates up. And what we do is we work with our teams all over the world and with partners here to get governments to put the resources on the table that are needed to get the big wins. And I will confess, it's a little bit harder now than it was a few years ago. A lot of the world's wealthy countries have turned inward. With all due respect, I think Ukraine is having a very big impact. And mind you, I think the world should be supporting the people of Ukraine, but I think we're seeing some of the costs of that in terms of the impact on a number of other issues. So those are the kinds of things, and again, citizens want to get behind it. They want to be part of making that kind of change, saying they did something to end the AIDS epidemic. So we do that. The big thing we're focused on right now is the topic, I think, also of the next panel, and many speakers spoke about it last night, which is how do we reimagine the global financial architecture so that it is more agile, more efficient, more effective, and more fair.
Thank you, Gail. Now we come to Mark, who is the president of the Open Society. Mark has a long career in public service. I mean, he used to be minister in UK for Africa. But I think more important than that, your work maybe in UNDP. I mean, you was the right-hand man for Kofi Annan. And actually, you guys launched the reform of UN in the year 2000, I recall. And here we are 23 years later, and we're still talking reform on the...
I don't know what Amina's been up to.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can see how hard it is to get things changed. And mentioning Kofi Annan, I really hope we remember that great son of Africa. I think he was a good son of Africa. Let us. As you know, Kofi was the first chair of our prize committee, actually. He helped us a lot in moving this, and also with your help at the time. I remember that, yes.
Well, look, I mean, I worked for him. Mark worked for him. Amina was inspired by him. A lot of people in that front row were inspired by Kofi. He was an extraordinary leader that we were all very, very proud to work for, and an inspiration in a way to this day, in which in his quiet voice he'd say, "What have you done to change the world today?" Or he'd never quite used such grandiose terms, but he was a great challenger. So Mo, to answer your question, what does OSF do? After years of trying to run on Kofi's behalf the parts of the UN system, I'm in the most liberated of jobs now, because I can describe our mission in essentially 4 words: democracy and human rights. The trouble is, it's a very challenged mission in today's Africa and in today's world. So in some ways, having said we're about democracy and human rights, our actual work is much more like my colleagues and peers on this platform than it might seem, because our analysis of what's broken is that societies have become so unequal, so unable to deliver economic security to the families and to jobs to the young men and women coming into the job market, that unless you address that broken social and economic platform, you simply do not have the bed on which democracy and human rights can securely and safely grow. And So as I listened to the two narratives about Africa of this weekend, we've seen both. We've, as a foundation, we find ourselves polishing off our grantees in the mediation area as we see Sudan, DRC, and others return to conflict. On the other hand, we're very, very involved in issues of debt relief and restructuring, working with Rockefeller and Gates, particularly in that case, and one. Because there are other countries which can seize that opportunity of increased investment, a measure of debt relief to allow them to get back to paths of growth. So we've really got two Africas, and as a foundation, we try to address both, but with that driving idea that we're trying to build open societies, democratic societies, where citizens can hold their governments to account. And I would just one last point, George Soros, who is our founding donor and still our inspiration, and now 92, people think he started in Eastern Europe, his philanthropy. He actually started it here in Africa. It was scholarships in 1979 to black South Africans, followed post-apartheid by huge investments in human rights, economic development, housing starts for black South Africans, which he saw as building that stable, inclusive democracy that is our search. And, I think we're always looking for opportunities, and, like everyone else in this room, we had our heart in our mouths when Hamdok became Prime Minister of Sudan. When Ellen was president, we were right there to try and support. So, we feel we live Africa, its setbacks and its advances, and are terribly proud to be here, and only wish we could equal MasterCard in actually having moved here, which is really a remarkable commitment to this continent.
Thank you, Mark. Now we have his brother, the other Mark. They are good friends. You used to work together. Mark, you lead now probably the largest and richest foundation in the world. Is that correct?
We're the largest by payout. The Novo Nordisk Foundation is now bigger than we are.
Your budget, I saw it the other day, is like a medium-sized African country, correct?
$8.3 billion.
Okay. Some presidents will envy you that. Now, we want to question you, are you spending this money wisely? What are you doing with all this money? This is a huge amount of money.
Yes.
Tell us what you're doing in Africa.
Yeah. Well, Mo, you are one of the best and most critical judges of whether we're spending our money wisely. And my partners on this panel will also be, because we're in partnership with every single one of them in a range of investments. But just to take a step back into the origins of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which really come from Bill and Melinda themselves in the late 90s, actually starting on a trip to Africa, which started as a tourism trip, but really helped them become aware of the huge global inequities, especially in healthcare, where millions of children across the world, especially in Africa, were dying of completely preventable diseases that children in the global north, in the United States, were simply not dying of because they had access to vaccinations and other treatments, which were simple and affordable. And it was that original deep sense of injustice and a view that, which is the mission of our foundation, and it's for those of you who ever get a chance to visit our headquarters in Seattle, it's carved on our wall outside, which simply says, every person deserves the chance to a healthy and productive life. That is the core animating vision and drive of the Gates Foundation. That said, because it's also founded by two computer engineers who are very focused on data and innovation and support, we're also looking, how do you do that? What is the most effective, impactful use of philanthropic capital to achieve those results? In the end, government is always going to be the principal driver, and should be. The private sector is a key innovator. Civil society are powerful voices. Philanthropy needs to be a catalyst. It needs to be an innovator. It needs to be a risk taker. And so over the years, we've evolved in several areas. We've kept our focus on global health, by far our biggest area of investment, but we've also looked for other areas where we see particular opportunities. Agricultural development, especially for the poorest of the poor. The majority of the world's very poorest people are still smallholder farmers, at least half of them women. Financial inclusion, a key opportunity for engagement to help address poverty, provide opportunity for those in need. And so over the years, we invest a significant amount of money, around half of it, give or take, in what we call innovation. A lot of that is the research and development. Research into new malaria vaccines and treatments. It is an outrage that a disease that still kills hundreds of thousands of children, affects tens of millions of people, especially in Africa, does not get funded naturally by the pharmaceutical industry at large scale because there isn't a market, because tourists can take prophylactics. So we are the largest funders of research into malaria, and we work with some partners like the Wellcome Institute. We work in areas like agricultural research and development, not just into areas of how you get more drought and flood resilient crops and livestock. I was actually visiting some drought-resilient chickens we were helping develop with Calro, the Kenyan researcher, and ILRI here in Kenya a couple of days ago. We work in areas like innovative financial products to help with women's economic empowerment. And then we will also support big multilateral partnerships. We already heard about Gavi, the Global Fund. We are the largest philanthropic funder of those institutions by a significant margin, and those work directly with countries to provide life-saving vaccines, malaria treatments, bed nets, ARVs for HIV. And we have become, over time, very large partners of the UN system. This is an area that Bill and Melinda themselves say they're very surprised to see. They were not expecting, when we founded, that we would be big partners of multilateral agencies, but we see that the UN agencies, the World Bank, the World Health Organization are critical partners to help disseminate and share public goods, especially on the continent of Africa. And then the other part of what we do is focused on the delivery and execution. How do you get those innovations to those most in need? And that is where a lot of our partnerships also happen on the continent and have been growing and developing, especially with African partners and institutions. So we work with the African Union. We've supported with the MasterCard Foundation the formation of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and support. We work with the Rockefeller Foundation and helped create AGRA that works on agricultural development across the continent. And we've been steadily increasing our footprint and our range of investments that the foundation I joined 15 years ago, which is when Mark and I left the UN after Kofi Annan stepped down, did not have any offices outside the United States at scale. We now have offices in India. South Asia is the other area of focus, but by far our biggest area of focus is now Africa, and we have offices in South Africa, in Nigeria, and Ethiopia. I'm very proud to announce that we'll be shortly opening an office here in Nairobi and also in Dakar, Senegal. And these are a sign of our long-term commitment to the continent, but also an understanding that we need to be engaging, listening, responding to the national priorities, to the voices of the partners on the ground. That we can provide these tools, we can provide the input, we can work with partners, and we're also funders of the One Campaign and Gail's work to help advocate for these issues. But in the end, it needs to be responsive to a framework of development priorities set by the government themselves. And I can't resist, in front of the Deputy Secretary General, reminding everybody that those are also priorities embedded in the Sustainable Development Goals, which were commitments made by every government in the world to their own citizens. And so we see ourselves as trying to help in the areas where we have expertise, health, gender equality, agricultural development, as helping the continent of Africa meet its potential to its own citizens in those areas.
Well, obviously, thank you. Obviously, given your budget, you are able to look at different areas, but many people identify you with health. Is that correct? Health is your main...
Health is the biggest.
The priority
it's about
thing.
Half of our spending.
Focus on, and one aspect you do fund, you always guys interested in scientific innovation.
Yes.
how to turn dirty water and clean water to drink it, harmless mosquito, you engineer something like that. You know, you do this kind of thing.
Yes, so we do a range. So let me use an example of sanitation as an area where we've been investing. We know that one of the challenge in big growing urban areas across Africa, it's very difficult to put in traditional sewage sanitation at scale.
Yeah.
But we know that sanitation is a huge scale. We've been investing very heavily in what we call a reinvented toilet. A toilet that would be non-water based, that is completely safe, usable, that can be deployed. We have models being deployed right now.
So Bill drinking the water from the toilet.
Yes,
Yeah.
Bill has is photographed. You drink the distilled clean poop water coming out of the thing.
And what
works
happened to
very-
these mosquitoes? You did not release them around. We're still getting malaria. What happened?
Yes, so, well, malaria, you first have to work with treatments. So we're working, and they're very exciting.
It's still work in progress.
Well, yes, there's work. Actually, Burkina Faso is doing some interesting work and partnerships there. But what you need is the full array of tools. Malaria is a good example. You want diagnostics, better diagnostics. You can find out when a child is sick with malaria. Treatments, prevention tools like bed nets, prevention tools like new sugar baits is what we use, where you can put them outside. And then we have very exciting new tools, not just the new vaccines, which people have heard about, which are very promising, but still have efficacy rates that are not as high.
Mark, our health services are quite weak for many reasons. Do you see as part of your mission is try to see how to strengthen the local capability? Of course, you come with all your scientific stuff and right, medicine, and you can do things, but you go. But do you want to leave something behind which can
Absolutely.
really, you try to do that?
In the end, health is delivered by healthcare practitioners at the front end, particularly in primary healthcare. Whether it's the vaccinations, the amazing healthcare workers who do the vaccinations, polio vaccinations.
So strengthening the local
So it's strengthening the full thing from
delivery.
primary healthcare clinic, nurse training and practitioners, building it back, ensuring there are supply chains that you actually get the requisite vaccines, tools, treatments available. And those are big priorities across Africa, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa. The president here has made universal health coverage, universal health care and primary health care a key priority. And yes, but that is also where we work with partners like UNICEF, like Gavi and the Global Fund, who increasingly need to put money into health system strengthening. So always it's a both and. You have to structure the system and the structure. And then this is also where, frankly, we have dependencies on partners like you, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and the OSF, because we know that a fundamental dependency is governance. Good governance is a bedrock to allow for accountable service delivery of the kind of structures that we try to.
But you avoid getting involved in politics.
We like to believe that direct politics, as I say, these are goals.
Can hinder
we
your
support.
work, frankly, can hinder your work, yes?
Yeah. The question is?
What I'm saying, involved in politics can hinder your work. You don't
Absolutely.
want problems, guys.
No.
Understand?
We are about, I say, we're not really about pushing on closed doors. We leave that. You are very good at pushing on closed doors in any door you want. We are about walking through open doors.
We have different mission.
We do, but they're complementary.
I really have some unfortunate news. Two items of news, actually. Ngozi have been taken ill. She was in Cote d'Ivoire, and she fell ill, and President Ouattara put her in his plane, send her back to Geneva. So we're going to miss her, but she's okay. But sorry about that. The second piece also of bad news, we have to shorten this session and the next session. I've just been informed that the Kenyan police, in its wisdom, decided it is important to come and sweep this room before the president arrives here. And I think because we talked about non-state actors, I'm sorry.
Trigger word.
Trigger word.
Trigger word.
So you guys gonna be swept, and I mean, this is unfortunate, but what do you do?
It's life.
Yeah, okay. Non-state actors cannot deal with state actors, you know, we don't have that power. Right. So I have very few minutes, actually, because I have a lot of questions to you. Let me ask one interesting question from our side. Your relationship with governments, local partners, etc. How is that dynamic? Do you work with local partners? Does government block you from local partners? Do you have to do compromises? How easy is your relationship with our governments in your work?
It comes back to the value I talked about, which is listening. We work with local partners. I mean, if you're trying to build solutions in
What
Africa,
local partners do you mean? What do you mean by local partners?
I mean everything
Foundations, you mean schools, you mean
universities in Africa,
Okay.
Educational institutions, skilling workshops.
No problem there.
No problem there at all. Where government is really important to us, though, is that clearly if you want to get the most efficacy for your investment, if you are pushing down the corridors that government has prioritized, to your comment about an open door, then clearly you get much more of a multiplier effect. And that is a two-way conversation because it's about listening and understanding, okay, so if those are the priorities, that's where we're going to get the biggest impact. But equally, it's trying to influence based on the priorities that we see.
Okay, I come back to you on another question. Any of you want to comment on this relation with government? Yes, Mark. Your work can cause problems.
Yeah, tell me. I mean, we are very much, by our own description, a political philanthropy, and we think we're probably unique in using that term about ourselves because we believe in political change. We think to get those doors ajar, to allow gates to push through with health and education support, needs strong governments that care, strong accountable governments that care about their people. So we're shameless about our political mission. We're not partisan. It's not our job to go out and campaign for a particular candidate.
Let me ask you a quick one. Your foundation was kicked out of Russia. You were kicked out from Hungary. Although, thanks to your scholarship program, you guys educated Orban, who now is the prime minister there, and he's the guy who's kicking you out. You don't know how to choose your scholars. I mean, you need to...
Tell me.
Yeah?
Yeah. No, well, look, I mean, the great glory of foundation grant making is the unintended consequences.
Have you been kicked from an African country?
We have not, well, we have not been kicked from an African country, although I would say that, you know, our relations at the moment, Amra, close your ears as I say this, in Egypt are difficult.
Egypt is difficult.
Yeah. But
Amr Musa, are you here?
Yeah.
Yes, can you please tell Sisi? Yeah. Are you safe to tell him that, or you will not see you again here? Okay.
But look, I mean, Mo, just the other half of your question is one I really do want to say, which is we work through local grantees and global grantees. I mean, our advocacy, our institution building is all around grant making. Now, one thing which has changed in the past, you know, George Soros's original philosophy was there are all these new democratic governments around the world, but there is not a developed civil society to keep them to account. So we were very heavily, almost exclusively investing in building civil society. Today's world, we feel is much more complicated. So we now do invest in trying to make help progressive governments achieve their agendas. We do partner with the private sector to try and bring capital in behind those programs of political change that we're committed to. So our range of partners has deliberately widened, although, you know, we're still, like others on this platform, we really, really value our local knowledge, our local connections and presence as our core piece of DNA. You know, we're not trying to make decisions about what to do in Kenya from New York. We're making them here.
Gail, you used to be in Obama's cabinet, and you used to be, you are a government operator, yeah?
I go back and forth between government and advocacy and government.
But that make it easier for you to manage the corridor of powers here in Africa?
Sure, to some extent.
Because your work also can be dodgy.
Well, My work is what?
It can be a little bit dodgy. I mean, no, from certain point of view.
First you call me a non-state actor.
No.
Now I'm here about dodgy work.
No,
No,
sorry,
I think...
not from my point of view. I support your work. I'm on your board. Come on. I support your work. But I'm saying from the point of view, a certain regime here will be a little bit uncomfortable with you.
No, I think that's true. I think, and look, I have an advantage in that I've been around for a long time, so I know a lot of people,
You know, people,
having
yeah.
worn other hats. But I think the way we tend to work with governments is this kind of dual way. We have what we call the outside game, which is the public campaign, right? How do you get citizens to weigh in? And again, sometimes it's to apply pressure, but if a government does what you want them to do, you should say, well done, because that's currency. The other is what we kind of call the inside game, is how do we work with governments? Often you'll find somebody who's a change agent within a government and might need some help to get something big done. So how can we quietly work with governments to help them do what they want to do behind the scenes and help create the political space?
Yeah, you see, according to our index, the data we're collecting here, we found that in the last few years, actually, African governments are closing space for civil society. You guys are aware of that. I'm sure you all feel that in whatever you do. And some African countries, actually, if you are an African foundation and you receive a donation from an international foundation or from any international body, you need to declare yourself as a foreign agent. And I found that so ridiculous because the same governments go to the same source begging for money. And nobody calls them agents. If you get money from the aid from here or from there, oh, you are wonderful, great. But if your foundation gets some funding, oh, you are criminal. How you get funding from other? It's so ridiculous what is happening to our foundations here. Do you find it difficult among, so you need to work with partners. Do you have difficulty with this kind of laws in trying to support your local partners here?
Well, I would answer yes, we do have difficulties, but we try to sort of make it as easy for them as possible. We're transparent about groups we support, but we let them promote if they want to or not, that we are supporting about them. I mean, we don't hide it on our website or something, because that we have a kind of accountability also, to elsewhere. Is this foundation doing good things, kind of thing? Is it a good non-state actor? So we have to, show that accountability, but to show discretion to local grantees. We are supporting human rights defenders on this continent and elsewhere whose lives are appalling. I mean, we are supporting a campaign across East Africa for LGBTQ rights. And, what's happening, not in Kenya, but in one neighboring country particularly, is, a unforgivable attempt to diminish the rights of citizens there. And so, ours is a dangerous place, but we've deliberately chosen it. We are a foundation created by somebody who was a refugee from Nazism and communism, who'd almost lost his life several times before he was 15, was a poor scholarship kid who went to the UK and from there to the US. He and we profoundly believe that the world is always in danger of going back, not always forward, that there are those pivot change points where you've just got to be the risk taker who steps up and makes that investment. Because, the kind of things we invest in, a donor government wouldn't invest in, a company wouldn't invest in, an NGO would have difficulty doing. So we wear our risk proudly because we think it allows us to support political change that others can't.
Thank you. No, I'm sure George Soros, who gets a lot of stick, actually, view as a liberal and Jewish guy. It is so funny. I mean, George is Hungarian, and there's a huge campaign in Hungary accusing him of trying to bring refugees in Hungary because you want to Islamicize Hungary. It's the first Jew in the world who's trying to turn Hungary into a Muslim country. Wonderful. You should tell Osama bin Laden. That's great. I mean, that's the easier one. Anyway, one thing you mentioned you're doing, education to understand, straightforward. You offer scholarships, and you say you want to create 30, correct? 30 million jobs in how many years?
By 2030.
By 2030. Let's say that you started in 2020, it's like 3 million jobs a year. And that's a huge ambition, and we need to take it to task over that, Zain, if you don't mind. Africa today produces every year 16 million young people coming to the job market. We are unable to offer more than 3-4 million jobs a year. You guys coming from MasterCard and say, I'm gonna create 3 million jobs, that is equivalent to what all the African governments are doing. That is a huge task.
Yep.
Can you just explain to us how you're doing that? Because maybe something we need to learn or to teach African governments how to do it.
Yeah.
How you do 3 million jobs a year?
One of the things that's critical to it is building entrepreneurs.
Entrepreneurs, yeah?
And of course, it's not actually 3 million per year. What happens is it's an exponential curve.
Okay.
Because entrepreneurs build more entrepreneurs. They build systems and ecosystems around them. And we've seen that happen in many countries as they've grown and developed. So yeah, we stay maniacally focused on education, but education with a purpose. And we're starting to look at how do you add things, modules, for example, on entrepreneurship. How do you get the private sector engaged? You know, one of the things that we found really disadvantages a lot of African graduates is there's no internships. There's nowhere for them to get some practical experiences that allows them to either enter the job market or to start to build their own future. You know, Valerie Tsaga and myself, we met, you know, you asked about our partners here. This morning, we met with 8 what we call young African leaders. These are people who have graduated and are starting their own businesses and are now becoming our partners to actually help execute some of our charitable programs. There was a young man who has built an application to actually formalize or create efficiency in the open markets in Kenya.
Take me through this. You gave good education to the people who decided to go into business. Now, they're going to need initial funding. Do you give them funding?
We also work on
leverage something.
We also work on financial inclusion. So we've worked with various banks in Africa to try and break the vicious cycle of punitive interest rates. So by funding first losses.
You do fund very
yeah, we've run programs.
Why didn't you tell the IMF and the World Bank to do something like that?
Believe me, I will be seeking them out at your dinner tonight.
Okay.
So yeah, these are the, you know, I started this by saying, how do we build a collective and much greater sense of urgency? Because there are solutions to these things. You know, African small businesses fail because they pay 15% plus interest rates.
Exactly.
And then they get charged higher interest rates because they fail. So how do you break that cycle? You break the cycle by funding the first loss. You prove to the bank that actually they are viable businesses and can run at much lower interest rates. But you have to tie it to the whole skilling chain. And the whole skilling chain means not just people coming out with university degrees, but understanding entrepreneurship, understanding how to write a business plan, understanding cash flow, because businesses don't fail because they're good or bad ideas. They fail because of cash flow. And so, I
tell you a small story the other day. Martin Wolf, who's the chief economist editor of the FT, wrote an article about the debt distress. And we're saying that many African countries have over 40% debt to GDP ratio, over 40%. And that is a big problem. And how we're going to deal with that? And I looked at this number and I said, what is 40% is not a lot number, you know. I went and checked. Do you know what the average number for the G7 countries is? 137%.
Yeah.
So I wrote to Martin and said, excuse me, the G7 countries have an average debt to GDP of 137%. Those guys have only 40%. How come those guys in debt distress and all those grade 7 are not in distress? The only difference was the interest rate.
Yep.
The rich borrow cheaply. The poor borrow very expensively. And it is ridiculous. And it's all in the hands of the rating agencies. The rating agency, they say, oh, those guys are risky. There is risk of failure. You need to have a huge African premium. Actually, you're studying a country with a debt of 17, 18, 20%. Nobody can pay that. Even the mafia doesn't charge their customers this number. Honestly. It's
true.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So they actually are engineering the failure of the countries, and then they come and say, oh, I told you so. I told you so, then, you know, I was right. You engineered it. And that's why the institutions need to find a way to break this vicious circle. Yeah. You know, cause failure, and then let's have a rescue. Let's have a program now to, come on, doesn't work.
It doesn't, absolutely. And the other thing that we need to start looking at, and you know, this is beyond just the non-state actors, but we need to look at not just debt, but also equity. Because that is, I think, a much faster unlock for Africa and much more supportive of the whole entrepreneurial system, and then scaling entrepreneurs, equity rather than debt. Or a joint set of tools.
Yeah, but both of them. I have only a couple of minutes, and I was given 5 more because the president is late.
Can I say something about the
Of
jobs
course,
and
William, I'm
government?
coming to you, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
William.
I just wanted to make a couple of points that have been discussed here. So first of all, I think, you know, I have been born and brought up here in Africa. And so whenever I'm in these sorts of forums, I speak with my Rockefeller hat, I take that off and I put on my African hat. So allow me to put on my African hat.
We love that.
Right. So I think, look, I think African governments can do, one of the things, challenges I see, and present company accepted, so I'm not talking about anyone on this panel, but one of the challenges we see with non-state actors is diversity and just everybody doing their own thing. In the same country, sometimes in the same district. And I think African governments can do a lot more to coordinate the activities of non-state actors and to coordinate the resources to work much more efficiently in terms of what the government actually wants. That's the first thing. I think secondly, we all work through local partners. I think we could do a lot better in terms of building the long-term capacity and institutionalization of these local partners. We need to build in our grants, money for building capacity, for technical assistance.
Correct.
And then we need to give them time.
Yeah.
You know, you can't tell somebody to build capacity and you give them a 1-year grant. You know, you've got to give them 3 to 5 years and build in some time as well as resources to build capacity. And guess what? You can have much more effective discussions with local governments if you're using local actors. And when you finish your intervention, you leave a strong institution and capability to move forward.
You know what, William? I think you should keep your African hat.
Thank you.
He talks much better with his African hat. I think so.
Or just put your African hat on when you're talking to Rockefeller.
Let me just make a comment about jobs. And I think it's a very bold ambition that the MasterCard Foundation's put out there. I'm 100% supportive of it. And I think that it's, you know, I worked for 20 years in the private sector. All of those 20 years right here in Africa. I also worked for government, and I also worked for non-state actors in different countries on the continent. And job creation is difficult. It is not easy, and you have to do all the things that Zain said, creating entrepreneurs and creating, you know, making sure that they have access to finance and, you know, first loss, blended finance. All those things are really important. But you cannot talk about jobs without talking about markets. And you cannot talk about jobs without talking about production. Every entrepreneur has to sell either a service or a product. That service or product has to be built, and that service or product needs to be sold. That's when business begins to happen, and that's when you begin to create jobs. One of the fundamental challenges we have as many African countries. Some are much better than others. A plug for my own country, Kenya, that is very market-driven. But others are not so well endowed in terms of fixing markets and allowing markets to work. Let me give you a good example. I talked earlier about the $2 billion that African governments are spending on purchasing food for institutions. So this is within their budget. This is not new money. They do this every year.
William, we're running out of time. Quick.
Okay, but many of them import grain to feed their school children. If you converted this to homegrown school feeding and ensured that all this food had to be bought locally, you begin to build local value chains. So I think that is something that we should look
I have two very quick locations because really running out of time. First one is that it's very important, I think, that we don't work in silos. And I'm glad that you are all interconnected. But I think it is really important to, and Mark, you worked on creating this global alliance of, I think that's something really important, and we appeal to you to continue working to build these alliances because to leverage each other. Working in silos. The thing I really wanted to ask, and we don't have time, is do you measure outcomes? Yes. What is the effective, you guys have huge resources. How you are measuring the impact of what you're doing? One of you can speak on behalf of the group because there's no time. Who is going to speak on behalf of the group?
One soundbite.
You accept him as you're talking in your behalf?
But one soundbite, but it'll be quick.
Okay.
Is we know that to date we've created 5.3 million jobs.
You know that?
We know that. We measure that. We know that we've put 45,000 scholars through and more than 50% have graduated. We know we track them as alumni. One of them is a minister. So we know the outcomes.
You measure.
And that's what I meant by we've pivoted from just input-driven to being very intentional. It's about the outcome, and you measure that outcome.
Maybe one addition, because my foundation staff hear me say this ad nauseum, but it's an important point to say. Our focus on outcomes in the end is not about money out the door, intermediate processes. In the end, the outcomes are, for us at least, lives saved and opportunities provided for the poorest and most vulnerable. And then you track back. A life saved can be, did the vaccine reach the child? You can do the calculation. At what cost? Can you track it back? Did the credit reach the woman entrepreneur? What were they able to use with that? How many businesses failed? How many succeeded? Yes, you absolutely, without metrics and data, you simply cannot assess whether you are being successful. And also that's something I think we're getting much better at sharing across, to exactly to your point, collaboratively with partner foundations, so that we're not doing this in silos. We're doing it together, and we're often taking the risks because you don't know if these are going to work, so that by the time we go to government or other partners and we're offering them and say, here is an intervention about agricultural development or healthcare, we think you can scale using that money, whether it's a school feeding scheme or something. We've done the hard work to prove that this is viable and cost-effective and measured in those human lives.
Please, you'll agree with me that those are wonderful set of people who are really working for Africa. They are not taking any gold or copper or resources from you guys. And I think we owe them a big thank you.